Between the smoke of victory parades and the silence of buried graves, a different war continued in the shadows. One waged not with rifles, but with erasures, codenames, and forged signatures. When Allied and Axis intelligence files began surfacing in declassified fragments, they told stories that were never meant to be heard, of operations that never officially existed, of men whose service records vanished overnight, of technologies decades ahead of their time, hidden beneath layers of secrecy and Cold War paranoia. This is not the war from textbooks. These are the stories sealed under decades of silence. Fragments of history that whisper from the burned edges of forgotten archives. Chapter 1. Operation Valkyrie's Forgotten Successor. In April 1945, as Soviet artillery thundered across the outskirts of Berlin, the Reich's political and military command was collapsing into chaos. The failed July 20th plot, known as Operation Valkyrie, had already exposed deep fractures within the Wehrmacht. Yet buried within the surviving communications of the German General Staff lies evidence of a second, lesser-known plan, one conceived not to depose Hitler, but to preserve his regime through negotiation and subterfuge. This clandestine effort, referenced in fragments of post-war intelligence files, bore the codename Operation Steinadler. It began, according to an intercepted Abwehr memorandum dated March 3, 1945, with General Wilhelm Burgdorf authorizing covert contact with intermediaries in neutral Switzerland. The intention was to initiate an informal surrender proposal to Western powers, while maintaining resistance against the advancing Red Army. The message included a ciphered signature. H. Fegelein, likely referring to SS Gruppenführer Hermann Fegelein, Hitler's liaison officer to the Wehrmacht, known for his access to both the Führer's bunker and the inner SS apparatus. The plan's objective was simple but treacherous: ensure the survival of the Nazi political elite by creating an escape corridor through Bavaria into Italy and ultimately to South America via the so-called Rat Line. Declassified OSS field notes from Bern, now preserved in the US National Archives under Record Group 226, describe strange diplomatic traffic between Swiss banking agents, Spanish Falangist liaisons, and unidentified German officers claiming to represent a post-hostilities committee. Among the coded transmissions is one particular entry marked April 22, 1945, titled Message from the Eagle. The content remains partially redacted, but one clear phrase stands out. The Reich endures through the corridors of faith and finance. This same phrase was later discovered in a confiscated letter written by SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny, dated 1949, referring cryptically to the silent continuation of the mission. What makes Operation Steinadler more than rumor is the corroborating evidence found in a set of MI6 decrypts from the so-called Trondheim cables. These communications, logged between 1946 and 1948, reference a man known only as Der Architect, believed to be a pseudonym for an SS major who managed the movement of high-ranking fugitives via the Vatican's refugee network. British intelligence identified him as possibly Karl Silberbauer, though no definitive proof has surfaced. The name reappears again in 1953 within West German intelligence BND payrolls. Attached to a civilian consultant specializing in strategic infrastructure planning, his listed address in Bonn corresponded to a defunct front company registered under a Swiss holding group traced back to Zurich, the same city where the Eagle Plan communications originated. The political climate of the early Cold War only deepened the secrecy. As the Allies turned their attention toward containing Soviet expansion, the pursuit of former Nazi officials became less a moral imperative and more a geopolitical inconvenience. American intelligence, under Operation Paperclip, actively shielded select individuals with technical or strategic value. This context provided fertile ground for the remnants of Steinadler to dissolve into legitimate Western institutions. In a 1972 West German parliamentary inquiry into wartime emigration, classified testimony by a former Argentine naval attaché confirmed the arrival of no fewer than 12 German officers aboard the cargo vessel Santa Lucia in September 1946, their documents authenticated by Vatican diplomatic seals. Among the cargo manifests, seized decades later by Argentine customs, officials was a crate labelled Archive DA. Its contents were never publicly disclosed, but according to a retired BND analyst who spoke anonymously in 1994, the crate contained microfilm reels of encrypted correspondence between Berlin, Madrid, and Buenos Aires, each marked with a stylized eagle insignia matching the Steinadler stamp discovered on wartime dispatches. The microfilm reportedly documented post-war financial transfers through Banco Alemán Transatlantico, later absorbed into Deutsche Bank's Latin American holdings. One chilling connection surfaces in 1982, when a West German journalist, Friedrich Mahler, was found dead in his Hamburg apartment under suspicious circumstances. Mahler had been investigating Nazi escape routes and had recently filed a story titled "The Eagle Never Fell." Police ruled his death an accident, but his notes, later recovered by his brother, contained references to Architect 4011B and a date, Berchtesgaden, 2nd May 1945. That same date appears in a Soviet report from the NKVD's Special Operations Division, describing an unverified sighting of SS officers fleeing the Berghof compound under cover of darkness toward the Austrian border. The file was stamped Utwärtssteno, classified until 2000, and when partially released in 2002, several pages were still missing. However, one marginal note by a Russian archivist reads, "Subject transported by neutral intermediary. Destination unknown." Historians have long debated whether Operation Steinadler truly existed or was a post-war fabrication designed to obscure isolated escape efforts. Yet the convergence of financial records, coded cables, and post-war movements suggests a level of coordination that surpasses mere coincidence. In 1961, a declassified CIA memorandum acknowledged that an organized exfiltration mechanism under SS oversight successfully relocated select technical personnel to South America via ecclesiastical protection networks. While not named explicitly, the memo's description mirrors the logistics attributed to Steinadler. The trail fades, as most do, into silence. But one final piece of evidence surfaced in 1987, when a Swiss archivist cataloguing dormant diplomatic files discovered an envelope sealed with red wax, bearing the initials KS. Inside were two black and white photographs. The first showed a group of men in Wehrmacht uniforms standing before an alpine chalet. The second, dated 1951, showed a nearly identical scene, but the men were older, dressed in suits, and one bore an uncanny resemblance to Karl Silberbauer. On the back of the photograph was written, in faint pencil, "Der Auftrag ist erfüllt. Europa schläft. The mission is complete. Europe sleeps." If Operation Valkyrie represented Germany's last moral rebellion, then Operation Steinadler embodied its cold survival instinct. No records confirm its full success, yet the whispers persist among intelligence historians and archivists alike. Somewhere between the ruins of Berlin and the boardrooms of post-war Europe, the line between defeat and continuation blurred into a single, shadowed legacy that outlived the war itself. Chapter 2. The Ghost Transmissions of Kolyma. In the frigid desolation of Siberia, there are places where even sound seems to hesitate. Between 1952 and 1956, Soviet signal monitoring stations began recording a series of unidentified Morse transmissions originating from the Kolyma region, a remote barren expanse synonymous with the Gulag system and the extraction of gold for Stalin's treasury. These transmissions were brief, erratic, and untraceable, each ending with a chilling call sign, Wolf 9. Initially dismissed as atmospheric interference, they soon attracted the attention of the KGB's Department 12, a division specializing in unconventional acoustic and electromagnetic phenomena. Declassified fragments from the Archiv Osobek Sluzhby, the Archives of Special Services, suggest that the first intercept was logged on February 9, 1952, at the Magadan monitoring post Kursk 4. The signal was reported as originating 320 kilometers northwest, deep within the tundra, near the ruins of an abandoned mining settlement, designated Camp P43 That settlement had been officially decommissioned in 1947, following reports of unexplained radiation sickness among forced laborers. The report, labeled File 12P43 1952, was stamped Sovershенно Sekretno, top secret, and personally forwarded to Colonel Ivan M. Petrov of the GRU's 6th Directorate, who authorized an investigation under the internal code name Project Voron. The investigation deployed a 4-man reconnaissance unit led by Captain Viktor S. Kravchenko. Their last recorded message, transmitted on May 12, 1952, consisted of only 3 words. Signal source found. Contact was lost within minutes. A rescue team dispatched 5 days later found their camp abandoned. The radio equipment was intact, but its tubes had melted as if from an internal surge. One journal entry recovered from Kravchenko's tent, now preserved in the Russian State Military Archive, RGVA, reads, "The air feels charged. The sound comes from below, not above." Decades later, in 1991, a retired KGB radio technician named Leonid P. Bystrov publicly confirmed the existence of the Wolf 9 transmissions. In an interview with Izvestia, Bystrov stated that the Morse code pattern matched wartime German military encryption, specifically a modified version of the Enigma G cipher used by the Abwehr for clandestine operations. "It was too deliberate to be static," he said. "Someone or something was sending coordinates over and over for years." When pressed, Bystrov claimed the encoded coordinates pointed to a region known during World War II as Gulag 17K, where, according to Soviet prisoner logs, a contingent of Japanese scientists under NKVD supervision had conducted applied biological experiments beginning in late 1945. The scientists, officially transferred from Manchuria, were part of the remnants of Japan's infamous Unit 731. Cross-referencing Kolyma mining records from 1946 reveals that the Soviets had indeed established a restricted research area under the administration of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, MVD. The site, labeled Zone Objekt 24, does not appear on any public Soviet maps. Surviving blueprints, uncovered in 2003 by historian Yevgeny Morozov, indicate the presence of subterranean facilities designed to house electromagnetic testing chambers. The technology described, magnetron devices and vacuum tubes capable of transmitting low-frequency signals through permafrost, was decades ahead of its time. The transmissions resumed in 1953, 1 week after Stalin's death. This time, the signal was triangulated to a point beneath the frozen river Indigerka. A report from GRU Field Unit Volna 2 noted that the pulses coincided precisely with geomagnetic disturbances recorded by Soviet observatories. The phenomenon was classified as echo phenomenon, a term used internally to describe unexplained electromagnetic recurrences associated with decommissioned military sites. However, according to a memorandum authored by Deputy Minister Georgy Malenkov, echo phenomenon was to be treated as a state security matter, not a scientific anomaly. All files were ordered sealed and field personnel reassigned. It wasn't until 1964 that a breakthrough occurred. A routine decryption exercise conducted by the Institute of Cryptography, Communications and Informatics, IKSI, produced a partial translation of the Wolf 9 messages. The deciphered fragment read, Object 24. Initiate final phase. V12 reactor intact. The reference to a V12 reactor has puzzled historians. The Soviet Union did not possess a functioning nuclear reactor in that region, and the designation V12 does not correspond to any known military project. Some researchers speculate it referred to a captured German device, possibly a field reactor prototype intended for remote energy experimentation. A 1951 CIA intelligence summary supports this possibility, noting unverified reports of German research remnants relocated by the Soviets to Kolyma for continuation under controlled conditions. By the late 1950s, the transmissions had become an open secret within Soviet signal intelligence. Kolyma monitoring posts continued logging the mysterious bursts every winter between December 20th and 24, always around midnight local time. No source was ever conclusively identified. In 1956, the KGB issued Directive 1037A, ordering the destruction of all echo phenomenon recordings. Yet several reels survived, smuggled out by an anonymous operator from station Königssee. Decades later, these recordings were analyzed by British researchers who confirmed that the transmission pulses contained harmonic intervals, consistent with pre-war German radio oscillators. The story might have ended as a technical curiosity were it not for a peculiar discovery in 1978, during permafrost excavation for a hydroelectric project near the former Zone Objekt 24. Workers unearthed a corroded steel capsule containing vacuum tubes, a copper coil, and an engraved brass plate reading Siemens AG Berlin 1944. Forensic dating confirmed its authenticity. Soviet authorities immediately cordoned off the site and confiscated all artifacts. The workers were relocated, their contracts voided. No further excavation was permitted. Internal memos from the Ministry of Energy, declassified after 1991, indicate that upon dismantling the device, engineers recorded a residual magnetic field anomaly consistent with operational current flow. In other words, the machine had been active somehow within the previous few years. To this day, no official explanation exists, but a chilling coincidence remains. Every December 22nd, amateur radio operators across eastern Russia report faint Morse bursts echoing on the 7 MHz band, short, repetitive, ending with the same sequence. 9. Wolf 9. The signal's strength has diminished with time, but not disappeared. Historians dismiss it as atmospheric noise. Cryptographers call it a hoax. Yet among the older radio operators of Magadan, there is another belief, a superstition whispered more than spoken, that Wolf 9 was never a signal meant for the living. It was a call from something buried beneath the ice, a transmission that outlived its creators, repeating forever from the frozen ruins of an experiment no nation ever officially conducted. Chapter 3. The Bunker Beneath Lake Königssee. In the summer of 1991, following the reunification of Germany, Bavarian civil engineers were tasked with clearing old munitions sites left behind by the SS in the Berchtesgaden region. It was routine work, detonations, sealing of tunnels, groundwater checks, until a team from the Federal Construction Service uncovered an anomaly beneath the southern ridge of Lake Königssee. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a network of reinforced chambers descending almost 100 meters below the lake's bedrock. The initial assumption was an unfinished wartime shelter. What they found instead led to a 20-year security blackout. The site was identified on old Luftwaffe maps as Anlage Süd 17B, later reclassified in SS archives as Project Morgenrot, translated as Project Dawn. The codename appears in a limited set of documents recovered from the technical office of the Waffen-SS. Division Forschung, dated between November 1943 and February 1945. The files describe phase studies in field propulsion and atomic compression technologies under directive of the Führerhauptquartier. At first, historians dismissed Morgenrot as pseudoscience, one of many desperate late-war fantasies conceived by Himmler's occult-leaning engineers. Yet the bunker beneath Königssee told a different story. The first chamber contained 12 cylindrical containers arranged radially, each stamped Siemenswerke AG, München, 1944 rise. Inside, investigators discovered remnants of copper windings fused into crystalline slag, evidence of electrical overload. Near the center lay a circular steel mount, its base scorched black and magnetically active. Radiation readings were abnormally high. The construction blueprints, found later in a partially burned folder at the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz, described this apparatus as a Feldtriebwerk-Versuchsanlage, field propulsion test facility. The responsible engineer listed on the document was Dr. Hans Kammler, the SS general who oversaw underground weapons projects, including the V-2 rocket program at Mittelwerk. Kammler had vanished in May 1945. His death was never confirmed. American occupation forces had already swept the area in 1945 under Operation Paperclip's Reconnaissance Wing. A 1946 U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps (CIC) report marked Königssee possible SS laboratory was later redacted, with the final note, materials removed, site sealed per instruction of Allied command. The same year, declassified U.S. shipping manifests show a convoy leaving Munich with technical cargo, destination Nevada Proving Grounds. No descriptions were attached. The convoy's authorization signature belonged to Colonel Robert J. Staver, the same officer who later transferred Werner von Braun's rocket team to Fort Bliss, Texas in the 1991 excavation. Workers recorded strange phenomena within the sealed tunnels, localized electromagnetic interference that disabled measuring instruments and drained radio batteries. One engineer, Dieter Klaus, later recounted in an interview that the compass needles spun wildly near the lower chambers, as if the air itself were magnetized. A small detachment from the Bundeswehr's engineering corps was brought in under orders from the newly formed Federal Intelligence Service, BND. After 48 hours on site, all civilian workers were dismissed, and the area was surrounded by temporary fencing. Officially, the project became a hazardous waste containment zone. Unofficially, however, scientists from the Max Planck Institute for Plasma Physics were seen entering the site in late August. When questioned years later, the institute denied involvement. Yet an internal memo from 1992, later leaked to Der Spiegel, referenced analysis of anomalous isotopic decay within ferromagnetic strata near Königssee. Such decay could only occur under conditions of high-energy plasma discharge, a process far beyond what wartime Germany was known to achieve. Bavarian locals recalled military trucks moving at night through the forest roads, headlights covered, engines muffled. One farmer claimed to have seen crates marked with the NATO logo being loaded onto unmarked helicopters. Government spokesman offered a simple explanation: Cold War ordnance disposal. But among the recovered materials catalogued before the site was sealed were several pages of schematics written in a mixture of German and English technical jargon. The most legible annotation, dated 2nd February 1945, read, "Plasma rotation achieved for 4.6 seconds, containment unstable." At the bottom of the page, in darker ink, Kammler ordered relocation to secure facility via Salzburg corridor. If true, it would imply that Morgenrot was functional, not theoretical. A photograph found in a US Army Signal Corps archive supports this theory. It depicts a massive cylindrical chamber, its walls lined with copper coils, bearing resemblance to early tokamak fusion prototypes. The caption reads simply, "Captured Experimental Unit, Bavaria, May 1945. No further details are provided. What exactly was tested beneath Lake Königssee remains uncertain. Soviet intelligence archives released in the early 2000s revealed that the NKVD had attempted parallel investigations into field energy technologies between 1946 and 1949, citing captured German documents referencing Morgenrot Phase 3. A memo from Beria to Stalin, dated September 1946, mentions unsuccessful replication of the Bavarian magnetic drive. This implies that both East and West were aware of the Königssee site's significance and possibly conducted joint suppression of its discovery during the Cold War to avoid technological disclosure. The most compelling evidence of a cover-up emerged in 2009, when Austrian spelunkers exploring restricted tunnels beneath the Obersalzberg found a sealed iron door bearing the SS Lightning insignia and an engraved phrase, "Die Sonne geht nie unter." The sun never sets. German authorities immediately closed the cave system, citing structural instability. 2 weeks later, the Federal Office for Radiation Protection quietly installed monitoring sensors around Lake Königssee. Their data, released inadvertently through environmental reports, showed recurring spikes of gamma radiation every April, always around the anniversary of Hitler's death. Researchers who obtained the excavation logs noted that the lower tunnels flooded after a controlled detonation in 1992. However, seismic imaging conducted in 2010 by the Technical University of Munich confirmed the continued existence of hollow cavities, large enough to house industrial equipment. One anonymous geophysicist described the readings as inconsistent with natural formations. Whether these chambers still contain remnants of Morgenrot's experiments is unknown. The deeper mystery lies in why all references to Project Morgenrot disappeared from Allied debriefings. Not even the post-war Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, which meticulously catalogued captured German technologies, mentioned the project by name. The most plausible explanation is that Morgenrot was absorbed directly into classified Western research, possibly the early nuclear propulsion initiatives conducted by the US Air Force in the 1950s. Whatever its true purpose, Morgenrot stands as a monument to a lost scientific ambition born in desperation. Beneath the tranquil blue of Lake Königssee, sealed by concrete and state secrecy, lies a fragment of the war's final experiment, a silence humming faintly with electromagnetic residue, echoing a time when nations sought salvation not through peace, but through control of forces they barely understood. Chapter 4. The Vanishing Convoy of Operation Harpoon. On the morning of May 16, 1944, under low cloud and biting wind, a British naval convoy departed Liverpool under extraordinary secrecy. Officially, it was a classified supply mission bound for Murmansk, one of the many Arctic runs ferrying material to the Soviet front. Yet the ships of cargo convoy HX-317, later renamed Operation Harpoon, carried no standard manifest. No tonnage reports, no cargo disclosures, no naval press statements. Even within the Admiralty, the file was restricted to the Red Section, a clearance level reserved for nuclear research and counterintelligence missions. At the heart of Harpoon was the merchant vessel SS Empire Viscount, escorted by two destroyers, HMS Marne and HMS Meteor. Both were modified with experimental radar arrays developed by the Telecommunications Research Establishment, TRE. The convoy's mission orders, retrieved decades later from the National Archives in Kew, are cryptically brief. Proceed to Grid 24K. Rendezvous with Northern Task. Cargo priority. Omega components. No document explains what Omega components referred to. A notation by Rear Admiral John W. Tovey in the margin reads simply, "Not to be discussed outside closed committee." Within 2 days of departure, the convoy's radio signals ceased. Standard Arctic routes were treacherous, U-boats, storms, shifting ice. But Harpoon's disappearance triggered unusual urgency at the Admiralty. An emergency conference held at Whitehall on May 20th was attended not only by naval staff, but also by representatives from the Ministry of Aircraft Production and the British Intelligence Service, MI6. The only surviving minutes from that meeting mention loss of sensitive prototype material and associated personnel, suggesting the convoy was carrying something of extraordinary significance. Declassified Enigma decrypts from Bletchley Park, labelled CXMS Alpha 1944-317, include intercepted German naval communications reporting a special British convoy located southwest of Bear Island. A U-boat commander, Captain Lieutenant Erich Bender of U-278, reported unusual radar interference and acoustic anomalies during pursuit. His final message, transmitted May 18th, reads, "Target vanished from scope, instruments blind." Hours later, U-278 was destroyed by depth charges from Allied patrols, but its radio log survived, listing multiple unknown signals on 50-centimeter wavelength and an annotation, possibly British countermeasure. By June 1944, the Admiralty declared HX-317 lost due to enemy action. No wreckage, oil slick, or distress calls were ever found. The convoy's loss was quietly omitted from official war summaries. But years later, in 1958, a Norwegian fisherman named Arne Løfseth dredged up a corroded metal container from the Barents Sea, its lead seals still intact. Inside was a partially preserved ship's log, its pages waterlogged, but legible in parts. The log identified the vessel as the Empire Viscount. The final entry, dated May 18, 1944, reads, "Course change ordered. Rendezvous instructions from Allied Command, not Admiralty. Coordinates correspond to Soviet sector. Cargo secured." The container was handed to local police, then to British authorities. Within 2 weeks, Løfseth's home burned to the ground under what investigators called electrical malfunction. He and his family vanished shortly after. The British Embassy in Oslo refused to comment. Subsequent inquiries into the incident produced no documentation. The recovered log reappeared decades later in the possession of an MI5 archivist who anonymously leaked several pages to The Guardian in 1999. These pages contained references to device, housing, and modulated emission arrays, terminology consistent with radar countermeasure prototypes, but also curiously similar to notes from early nuclear detection systems. It appears Harpoon's true purpose was not supply, but delivery of experimental electromagnetic equipment to the Soviet Union as part of a secret Allied technology exchange, a partnership the British government has never acknowledged. Soviet archives released in the 1990s contain fragments supporting this theory. A GRU memorandum dated June 1944 references expected arrival of Western apparatus for frequency inversion testing under the codename Object Kappa. The delivery, it notes, failed to arrive due to unexplained atmospheric disruption. The report's final line, handwritten in Cyrillic, reads, "Radar phantom, untraceable, believed lost in dimensional refraction." Whether this phrase was metaphorical or technical remains unclear. Among naval historians, the prevailing view is that Operation Harpoon was deliberately erased to conceal a failed wartime collaboration with Stalin's intelligence services. During 1943-1944, Allied planners were under immense pressure to share radar innovations with the Soviets to improve Arctic convoy defense. Yet internal MI6 memos express concern over Soviet espionage and unsecured information transfer channels. It is conceivable that Harpoon was a controlled leak, a mission designed to deliver selective technology while masking a larger intelligence operation. A 1974 declassified US Navy document adds another layer. It references loss of classified British materials during Arctic transmission and the subsequent establishment of Magnetic Counterintelligence Directive 201B, a protocol for suppressing incidents involving electromagnetic experimentation. The American report concludes with the phrase, "All records to remain sealed under NATO Article 9 until 2019. As of 2025, those records remain inaccessible. Eyewitness rumors persist among surviving Arctic sailors. Some claim they intercepted distress fragments from Harpoon describing bright arcs in the sky and magnetic surge disabling instruments. Others speak of a second convoy, coded White Torch, that departed 3 days later and returned empty, its logbooks stripped. No photographs or surviving crew lists have ever surfaced. What truly happened to Operation Harpoon remains one of the Royal Navy's most enduring mysteries. No shipwrecks from the convoy have been located despite extensive sonar surveys across the Barents Sea. And yet, each winter, local fishermen report sonar echoes of large metallic objects moving slowly beneath the ice shelf. Objects that appear, shift course, and vanish without trace. In the archives of the Imperial War Museum, a classified folder labeled Harpoon Closed per Section 7, Official Secrets Act, contains a single photograph. An aerial shot of the Barents Sea dated May 19, 1944. At the center, beneath swirling clouds, a faint circular disturbance distorts the water's surface. On the back of the image, written in pencil, are 5 words. Convoy departed. Convoy never arrived. Chapter 5. The Silence of Camp 27B, the Ardennes. Winter, 1944. Amid the dense forests and winding ridgelines of southeastern Belgium, stood a compound that did not officially exist, an SS installation designated Camp 27B. Its coordinates do not appear on Wehrmacht logistical maps, and its designation is absent from Red Cross inspection records. The site's existence first surfaced through a 1957 French military dossier labeled Laboratorium Nachtfels, which described it as a restricted biological and psychological research facility under direct SS control. No photographs were attached. Only a single line in a debriefed French resistance report gave a glimpse of its nature. No prisoners left alive. No guards remained. Construction began in late 1942 under the supervision of the Mons SS Wirtschaftsverwaltungshauptamt, the economic and administrative main office responsible for managing the concentration camp network. The facility was disguised as a prisoner transit station near the village of Covert, supplied by rail from Liège. However, intercepted Allied intelligence, later declassified under the Ultra program, suggests the trains carried not prisoners, but medical shipments labeled Phase 3, materials, caution, chemical. One intercepted message between SS General Hans Kammler and IG Farben executive Dr. Karl Brandt, dated January 1943, refers cryptically to controlled neurochemical evaluations at Nachtfels compound. When American forces advanced through Belgium in December 1944, the camp was empty. Aerial reconnaissance showed no human movement, no vehicles, not even animal carcasses. Yet the vegetation around the perimeter was dead, blackened as if by fire. A US Army intelligence unit, the 319th CIC Detachment, was dispatched to investigate. Their initial report, dated January 2, 1945, described the site as sterilized by thermite application. The structures, barracks, laboratories, guard towers, were reduced to twisted metal and vitrified stone. However, one of the officers, Lieutenant Raymond D. Walker, noted in his field diary that the destruction seemed unnaturally precise, as if controlled by design rather than battle. Beneath the main courtyard, the team found a reinforced cellar sealed by a lead door. Inside were rows of steel tables fused into the floor, restraints still bolted to their edges. Scorch marks covered the walls. Among the debris lay fragments of medical glassware and a single scorched notebook written in German shorthand. Translation revealed fragmented references to substance N47 and Erinnerung serum, literally, memory serum. The last entry, dated November 21st, 1944, reads, Trials on subjects 1419 complete. Results unstable. Termination ordered by Obersturmbannführer Kruger. No records exist for any officer of that name. Declassified French intelligence from 1946 adds another layer. Agents investigating post-war IG Farben assets found laboratory correspondences referencing Project Echo, a continuation of Nachtfeld's research transferred to a pharmaceutical subsidiary in Frankfurt. When questioned, former employees admitted that samples from 27B had been sent to civilian research centers under Operation Bloodline, an obscure paperclip adjunct aimed at relocating German scientists to Allied laboratories. The United States denied the program's existence, yet a 1951 CIA logistics document confirms transfer of 6 chemical specialists from Bavarian and Ardennes sectors to Fort Detrick, Maryland under sealed security clearance. Fort Detrick, at that time, was America's hub for biological warfare experiments. Survivor testimony from nearby villages paints an eerie portrait. Locals recalled that in early 1944, they heard metallic humming emanating from the forest and saw lights flickering at night, white, not orange like fire. A farmer's son discovered dead foxes near the perimeter fence, their fur discolored, their eyes clouded white. When Allied troops arrived months later, radiation testing was not yet standard procedure. The ground was bulldozed and reforested, but soil samples collected in 1992 revealed elevated traces of thallium, mercury and phosphorus, chemicals consistent with nerve agent synthesis. In 1968, Belgian police discovered a sealed steel container unearthed by construction workers near the old site. Inside were brittle film reels labeled 27B Trials Do Not Project. Before they could be examined, the container was confiscated by NATO security officers under Article 5 jurisdiction. The Belgian government filed a protest that vanished into classified correspondence. No reels have ever resurfaced. A former NATO archivist, speaking anonymously in 1983, claimed that the films were analyzed at a US Air Force base in Ramstein. According to his description, the footage showed human subjects exposed to vaporized compounds while undergoing continuous EEG monitoring. They wanted to measure memory erasure, he said. It was not about killing. It was about removing the recollection of pain. When asked for proof, he replied that he had seen the final reel burned by his superior, who told him, "This is older than the Cold War." By the 1970s, Camp 27B had entered the realm of rumor. Yet a handful of documents preserved in the Belgian War Crimes Archive confirm the camp's exact coordinates. Latitude 50,0462° N, longitude 4.458° E, and listed under the codename Mirror Zone. The name originates from an internal OSS cable sent to Washington in March 1945, which states, "Recovered evidence of chemical interrogation program. Potential for Cold War adaptation. Recommend immediate classification." That recommendation was followed. The Mirror Zone file remained sealed until 2005, when a redacted summary was finally released. It confirmed the use of neurological stimulants and suppressants on human subjects, but omitted all names and operational specifics. Among the few physical remnants recovered from the site was a steel crate stenciled with the initials AG and the date 12/11/44. Inside, archaeologists found warped glass cylinders and a brass tag engraved with the words Zur Erinnerung. 20B bleibt still. Translation, in remembrance. 27B remains silent. The phrase, hauntingly ceremonial, implies that whoever destroyed the facility did so deliberately to ensure its secrecy. One chilling rumor persists among military historians, that the destruction of 27B was carried out not by the Allies, but by the SS itself under Action Letzter Spur, Operation Last Trace, a scorched earth directive ordering the elimination of evidence relating to advanced human experimentation. Records suggest similar purges occurred at Ravensbrück and Dachau in the final months of the war. But only Nachtfels left behind the lingering contamination of chemicals unknown to civilian pharmacology until the 1950s. In 2011, an independent team of Belgian researchers attempted to access the site for environmental study. They were blocked by security contractors operating under NATO authorization. A week later, the team's funding was suspended without explanation. Satellite images from that period show new construction, an underground structure precisely where the original camp once stood. Its purpose remains undisclosed. The official stance of both NATO and the German government is that Camp 27B never existed. The forests near Covert are now a nature preserve, fenced and unmarked, its boundaries guarded by motion sensors. Local hikers report static interference on radios and phones within the restricted perimeter. Sometimes, they claim, they hear faint metallic clicking, like the distant rhythm of a Morse transmitter, echoing beneath the soil. No one stays long enough to find out what it's sending. Today, the silence of Camp 27B endures, less the quiet of nature, more the imposed stillness of something buried too deep to unearth. And somewhere in that silence, sealed under layers of earth, metal and secrecy, the last echo of Laboratorium Nachtfels continues to whisper a question history cannot answer. How much of the human mind was sacrificed in the name of war? And who still holds the formula that made it possible? The files remain incomplete, the testimonies fragmented, and the evidence buried under the weight of deliberate omission. Across Europe and beyond, sealed archives and redacted reports continue to pulse with unanswered questions. Was Operation Steinadler truly dismantled? Or did it evolve into the quiet corridors of Cold War diplomacy? Did the Wolf 9 signal ever cease? Or does it still echo beneath the permafrost? What rests beneath Lake Königssee? And what vanished with Convoy Harpoon into the Barents fog? The silence of Camp 27B lingers, not as an ending, but a reminder that history's most unsettling truths do not disappear. They are only deferred, waiting for the next file to be unsealed, the next code to be broken, the next name to surface from the blacked-out lines of forgotten history.